Chapter 41. Some brave children meet a roaring bull. It was hot, very hot, in the summer of 1962 in Birmingham, Alabama, but that didn't seem to make any difference to the city's white leaders. They closed all the city's public recreational facilities because they didn't want to see them integrated. That meant 68 parks, 38 playgrounds, 6 swimming pools, and 4 golf courses were locked up, and no one in Birmingham, kind-hearted or mean-spirited, young or old, could enter the parks or swim in the city pools. For the wealthy, there were private pools and clubs, but for most people, there was no escaping the heat. Birmingham, Alabama's largest city, had plenty of moderate, clear-headed citizens, but the South's moderates were used to keeping quiet. Perhaps they feared mob action or the disapproval of some of their friends or the violence of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had helped elect Eugene "Bull" Connor as Birmingham's Commissioner of Public Safety, police chief. Connor was about as big a bully as the South had ever produced. Besides that, he wasn't very smart. Bull Connor helped the civil rights movement a whole lot, although that wasn't what he intended to do. This is what happened. Birmingham's black citizens were marching, protesting, and demonstrating. They wanted the same rights as everyone else. They wanted to be able to eat in any restaurant. They wanted to end segregation. They wanted to vote. Those were all their civil rights. They were demonstrating peacefully and nonviolently, but Bull Connor threw them in jail. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Birmingham and joined the marchers, and he was thrown in jail. Around the nation, people began to be concerned. A Southern jail was a dangerous place for a black civil rights leader. King decided to write a letter from Birmingham jail and explain the reasons behind the civil rights movement. He didn't have any writing paper, so he wrote on the margins of a newspaper and on toilet paper. He chose his words carefully. His powerful and persuasive letter explained what the marches were all about. He said it was unjust laws. But Dr. King and the other leaders knew something dramatic was needed to capture the nation's attention. Demonstrators were being sent to jail every day, yet no one was doing anything about it. Thousands of demonstrators were needed. Most blacks knew they would lose their jobs if they marched. Where could they find thousands of people who would march and not worry about losing their jobs? In the schools. We started organizing the prom queens of the high schools, the basketball stars, the football stars, said Reverend James Bevel. Those student leaders got others interested. Bevel had already helped organize a demonstration in Nashville, Tennessee. College students there sat down at lunch counters and politely asked for items on the menu. When they weren't served because of the color of their skin, they stayed in their seats until the police took them off to jail. Across the South, black and white students took part in sit-ins at lunch counters. Some people poured ketchup on the students' heads, others hit and kicked them. President Kennedy said, "The new way for Americans to stand up for their rights is to sit down." But privately, JFK was urging Dr. King to ease up on the confrontations. He didn't want trouble. In Birmingham, boys and girls from the high schools, junior highs, and elementary schools wanted to march. We held workshops to help them overcome the crippling fear of dogs and jails and to help them start thinking on their feet, said Bevel, who taught the children the ways of nonviolence. In Montgomery, when a woman was asked why she got involved in the bus boycott, she had said, "I'm doing it for my children and grandchildren." In Birmingham, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The children and grandchildren are doing it for themselves." Some 600 children there marched out of church singing, and Bull Connor arrested them all. The next day, another 1,000 children began a peaceful march. Connor called out his police dogs. Firemen turned on high-pressure hoses. The fire hoses were so strong they ripped bark off of trees. When the water hit the children, they were thrown to the ground and rolled screaming down the street. Television cameras hummed and people worldwide saw what was happening to Birmingham's children. Police dogs bit 3 teenagers so badly they had to be taken to the hospital. A small girl and her mother who knelt to pray on the steps of the city hall were arrested and taken to jail. 75 children were squeezed into a cell built for 8 prisoners. They sang freedom songs. Can you see why Connor helped the civil rights movement? Decent people were outraged. Most had not realized how bad things were for blacks in the segregated South. Now they could see for themselves on TV. In Washington, President Kennedy remembered stories his grandfather had told him about anti-Catholic mobs who burned Catholic houses in 19th century Boston. Kennedy knew that racial and religious hatred had no place in America. He asked his brother, Attorney General Robert Bobby Kennedy, to work to bring justice to all Americans. Bobby Kennedy would devote much of his energy to that cause. The highest respect for the law. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote a letter from the Birmingham jail. He addressed it to 8 clergymen, Christian ministers, and a Jewish rabbi who had criticized the civil rights demonstrations and wondered why Dr. King had come to Birmingham. Here is part of what King said. I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. There are 2 types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is, in reality, expressing the highest respect for the law. On Sunday, September 15, 1963, a bomb exploded with the force of 12 sticks of dynamite during Sunday school in Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church. On May 22, 2002, a jury found 71-year-old Bobby Frank Cherry, a former Ku Klux Klansman and the last living defendant, guilty of that horrible crime.